seminars. And it's a great pleasure today to introduce Jose Carlos Aguiar, who's come from the University of Leiden, where he's a professor in the Department of Latin American Studies. Jose's worked on a variety of different issues, likely to know his working relationship to this intertwined study of the circulation of global commodities and the forms of illegality with which that intersects. He's done really fascinating work on pirate CD flows between China and Mexico, and also worked in other Latin American market contexts, Paraguay, Uruguay border regions in particular, which is fascinating. Today, however, he's going to talk about a new strand of research which he's been conducting fieldwork in Mexico for the past year or so, or more. And the topic of today's talk is going to be the devotion to Santa Muerte, crisis, violence, and popular religiosity in Mexico. So, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Magnus. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Magnus and Filippo for the very kind invitation to come and talk about these issues that concern us, and to you, of course, for the interest in the talk of today. This project belongs to a larger research project that I'm carrying out with two colleagues from Utrecht and Amsterdam on popular culture and illegality. We are looking at the material registers of illegality and whether or not culture can become a mechanism through which criminal actors become legitimate among specific locations in Latin America. One colleague of mine works in Brazil with hip-hop. It seems that the lyrics and the music creates or influences certain perceptions of illegality and legitimacy among youngsters in Sao Paulo and Rio. Another colleague of mine works on muralism and street art in Jamaica, in Kingston, because also the Dons, who are the bosses of these drug trafficking networks in Jamaica, they work as local leaders, and they have portraits made, and the zones of influence are defined through this iconography. And I'm working on something, so I have this here, that brings me back to a process that is going on for a number of years already in Latin America, which I find very fascinating. There is something about religion in Latin America that is quickly changing, and it has to do with the influence of certain activities or networks or domains that are deemed as illegal or criminal by the states or by society at large. So we see that at once criminals who are not, of course, fitting or are not protected by the official saints or the official institutional churches, they look for help and protection in different kind of forms. One of them is, for instance, Santa Muerte in Buenos Aires. This is a figure that appeared in the 20th century, actually in the 19th century, that is related to criminals, thieves who look for protection in Santa Muerte, and has become a very popular folk saint among criminals in Buenos Aires in particular. But it's not the only case. Actually, in the 17th century already, in Santiago, you had this Virgen Negra in Chile, which is very well known as a protector of vagabonds, also thieves, and people who are just, wandering around and so forth. So she also, as a Catholic image, as a Catholic virgin, she also relates to the world of criminality, or let's say to the underworld or the world of the others. But more recently, then we have also Gauchito Gil, once again in Las Pampas, Argentinas. And this is a guy, a folk saint, who has also become of traffickers and criminals in the Pampas. We have also in Lima, Sarita Colonia. Sarita Colonia is a girl from the highlands of Peru who migrated with her family early in the 1930s to Lima. And she was a very good girl, very obedient, like the children of today. And she died very young, under very unclear circumstances. And since then, she has been perceived as a folk saint that protects criminals and, once again, thieves and different kind of wrongdoers. And even the jail of Lima is called, after Sarita Colonia, La Cárcel de Santa Colonia. So very popular. And then we have more recently in Mexico figures like Jesus Malverde, who is actually a historical figure. He also existed himself. This is a guy, a sort of Mexican Robin Hood, that lived in Sinaloa in the 1910s, and he was very popular because he was giving away money or different kind of favors or protection to all kind of people in Sinaloa. And after his death, he became a folk saint. So what we have here is that these saints, of course, are not recognized by the church, but they are seen as a sources of protection and some kind of link to the world of the divine, to the supernatural world. But it doesn't stop here. We have also the Santos Malandros in Caracas. These are images, statuettes of actual criminals who were killed during the Caracazo in the 80s in Venezuela. So as the iron fist of the government really vanished away, a whole layer of whole generation of street people, among them these thieves, they were perceived as saints, as folk saints, and they also called, their spirits called back to this world through this kind of spiritism, and they can even possess people for you. So you have to be careful, because these criminals can also possess you. And by possessing people, they have a clear influence or protection of all contemporary, or let's say, now today, criminals as well in Caracas. We have even San Nazario, for instance, in Mexico. San Nazario is a very interesting figure in the state of Michoacán, who recently passed away. He was killed by the police. Actually, he has been killed 2 times already by the police. Maybe it will be a 3rd time. But the 2nd time, apparently, was the definitive one. And this is a very interesting case because this guy was an actual drugs baron. So he was the head of the Familia Michoacana, that is known as one of the most violent and bloody organizations, so-called cartels, that was running most of the trafficking of different kind of goods, illegal, also legal, through Mexico, particularly Michoacán. And he was very aware of the cultural influence of his persona, and he even wrote books that were published and were given away for free among people, on which he was presenting his figure, but also justifying the way why he chose for the criminal path. And even he wanted to present himself as a saint, and he made all these images circulate of himself as a folk saint, as a protector of different kind of drug traffickers in Mexico. So what we have here is a first conclusion. There is a clear repertoire, a cultural repertoire of folk saints in Latin America that link the world of the criminality to the upper world, to the world of the legal, institutional context of contemporary Latin America. Of course, as you perhaps can imagine, this is not surprising. Latin America is nowadays the most violent region of the world. Among youngsters, people between 15 and 25 years, violent criminal death is the main cause of death in the region. So clearly, this context of violence and criminal activity and violence has some relation to the emergence of all this repertoire, this pantheon of folk saints across the region. And when I was doing my field work, as Magnus was telling, I did my PhD research on pirate CDs in Mexican marketplaces, particularly in the, I'm sure you know it very well, the San Juan de Dios market in Guadalajara, in Mexico. It was in the early 2000s. I realized that something was changing there was the very timid, the very clear emergence of this figure. So I'm talking about this skeleton wearing this robe, this Franciscan-like robe, with these different kind of elements that define this image, and is called the Santa Muerte. And Santa Muerte at once appeared in this context of informal commerce, particularly in marketplaces, where people who were selling previously hierberia, all this herbal and magical medicine, at once this figure seemed to find a niche and become very popular, and was starting to pop out in all marketplaces across Mexico. And of course, the figure of Santa Muerte goes once again hand by hand with these other folk saints, as Valverde once again in this representation, the guy from Sinaloa, the Mexican Robin Hood, who very clearly were sharing these positions among the other legitimate official saints. As you can see, for instance, in this style, you see the Virgen de Guadalupe and the San Judas Tadeo, who are obviously official saints in the Catholic tradition, and at once they're sharing the space, the tete-a-tete with this typical Santa Muerte in Mexico. So clearly there is a new repertoire of supernatural, of religious images that are very much tied to this world of criminality in Mexico. This is again another image in which you can see once again this hybrid composition of Catholic with these emerging forms of popular religiosity in Latin America. This was in the Corona Market, also in Guadalajara, but this process was, of course, not only observable in Guadalajara, but also in places like Mexico City. And this is, I guess, what you saw in Mexico City. These altares peregrinos, these pilgrim altars, these small wagons that were pulled across downtowns Mexico City as a way to promote this devotion to Santa Muerte. And here you can see really that this image has different representations, right? We see different colors, and each color has a different function, of course, going from the gold or the yellow one, which is supposed to bring you money and economic success, to the green that's supposed to bring you health, or life, and so forth. So these altares peregrinos were supposed to promote the devotion to Santa Muerte, and something that this is 2008, something that really triggered my attention was this relation between something like muerte, death, to esperanza, hope. So this relation between something that, from a Catholic point of view, is deemed as the end of your life, of course, in this world, be connected to hope. I thought, well, this is interesting. How can death become hope? I have to be very clear that the emergence of these popular saints are not the only cultural expressions about criminality in Latin America. We see at once in countries like Mexico, where per capita each Mexican reads 0.8 books per year. You see at once the rise, the emergence of a whole industry on narco literature. I'm speaking about all these novels, stories, journalist accounts depicting and narrating the life and stories of many of all these drug-traffickers, like La Barbie, of course from the Barbie, because she's blonde and good-looking. Las Reinas del Narco, La Reina del Sur, who is also a very well-known drug-trafficker who was put in jail in Mexico and now is kind of being liberated again, very strangely. Miss Narco, a beauty queen who was also involved in the world of drug trafficking, and so forth, sicarios, the serial killers, and so forth and so forth. So clearly there is a cultural industry that somehow depicts or relates to this world of illegality. And here I was wondering, well, what is this? Are these expressions of a culture of illegality? So celebrations or productions that somehow normalize or reify illegality in contemporary Latin America? Or are we dealing with a narco culture? This is a very, once in Mexico there's all this talk about narco culture. There's a narco culture coming up. Well, so is this then the example or the expressions of this narco culture? And I was looking, through these eyes of narco cultures and legality to Santa Muerte, and then something very important happened last year in Mexico that really changed my perception on the topic. As perhaps you are aware, since 2006, more than 120 people have died in Mexico since the implementation of the security policy, the open war against drug trafficking in Mexico. And one of the most painful moments of contemporary history of Mexico was last September when 43 students from Ayotzinapa disappeared. And one of them, of the students, appeared a couple of days after that, and his body was partially uncovered. His underwear was removed and so forth, and his face was of course, I'm not showing the actual picture because also the actual picture wasn't circulated, but out of respect from this, for the victim of this violence, I'm making use of this cartoon, and it's a very clear representation of what happened with this guy. And then at once I realized that there is something then going on about the security crisis and the way Mexicans not only deal with death, but also how they represent death. That somehow becomes visible in Santa Muerte. So this completely changed my perception on this. And then I realized that Santa Muerte is very much related to the security crisis and the skulls and the bodies that are appearing all over the Mexico every day at this point in Mexican history. So a saint, a folk saint that somehow relates to the underworld of criminality, but is also very much entrenched in Mexican culture. I mean, we were also speaking about yesterday how death of the skeletons, skulls are actually icons that actually are not new for Mexico. So let's see at it and look at this, and we can see that really there is a number of cultural repertoires or iconographies that are feeding or nurturing the representations of Santa Muerte. With this I want to say that Santa Muerte is not only one thing, but different kind of things. Let's look at it. First of it, the image of Santa Muerte is very much influenced by the pre-Hispanic material culture. This is a given, right? As perhaps you're aware, in the world of the Mayas and the Mexicas, used by the time the Spanish arrived to Mexico in the 16th century, there was a strong devotion or adoration of the underworld, particularly represented in the image of Mictlantecutli, who was the god of the underworld. This is a figurine produced by the Totonaca culture, already in the 600, 900 after Christ in Mexico, in Jalapa, in Veracruz. And this was the king or the god of the underworld, the one who connected the world of the deceased with the living ones. And he was perceived as a god. And it was this image of Mictlantecutli was taken on by other posterior cultures in Mexico, like the Totonaca culture. This is another one presentation from later on, until the Mexica culture, which is the culture we know as the Aztec culture as well. Mexica is a word they will use themselves to describe themselves, not Aztecs. Aztecs is a Spanish word. So they will represent Mictlantecutli then as this skin, this skeleton that was connecting these two worlds and protecting also the living ones through the power of death. So this is what the Spanish met when they arrived to Mexico City. And of course, once again, you can see, of course, the skull, the skeleton, the skin bodies, and the ornamental use of skulls also in pyramids and housing and so forth in Teotihuacan, but also in Tenochtitlan in nowadays Mexico City. So this is one cultural repertoire that feeds the representation of Santa Muerte. We will see later on. A second one, which is also equally important, is this European iconography that somehow is present in Santa Muerte as well. Of course, as we can see with this piece of art, we see that also in the European iconography, particularly in the late Renaissance, beginning of the Baroque times, this notion of death is very present, or the consciousness of death is very present in the visual culture of Europe in general. So we have all these memento moris, these prints and these paintings, or these prints that I was saying, in particular this one, that are meant to remind us that our life, even if we feel very sure about this world here and now, well, it will be over, and death is it was going to be our end. And then these ideas or these notions were traveling or moved, of course, to Latin America through the colonial ruling of the Spanish in Mexico, and they were taken on in different locations on different forms. Of course, what we saw in Latin America is the influence of Spanish Catholicism, which was a very conservative, a very kind of medieval Catholicism. In Northern Europe, there was already reform. I mean, so all these influences didn't have an impact on Spanish Catholicism. So the Catholicism that came to Mexico was, of course, this very dark and Catholicism in which death was perceived as a punishment as well. So, and once again, of course, in Latin America, like in Quito, the representation of the death is very much present. And then I make a small stop here. This is a painting by the Escuela Quiteña in Ecuador. This is one of the first Latin American schools that appeared after the Spanish rule. And I'm really representing this Franciscan monk who is, of course, wearing this robe and is coming back from a death to life. And this is, of course, something that is very present in Santa Muerte. Okay, I want to move on. So, fourth repertoire that is feeding Santa Muerte is the contemporary popular culture. And by popular culture, I mean, we're among anthropologists and other disciplines, so we know that popular culture is not only one thing, it's this repertoire that we all share and relate to, which is influenced by institutions, but also by other kind of actors, which can be official and unofficial and so forth. And in this sense, José Guadalupe Posada, for instance, in the beginning of the 20th century, he elaborated these prints where he represented this old-fashioned regime as death. So La Catrina, which is this skeleton that became very famous and actually an icon of the revolution, was a representation of the old regime. This was the old Porfirian bourgeoisie that disappeared after the revolution of the 1920s. And this was his way to say the regime by Porfirio Diaz, the dictator of Mexico before the revolution, is old, is dead, doesn't belong anymore. If you see her attire, is very old, it doesn't match anymore to the world of today. And this was something that later on was taken on by the muralism in Mexico, like Diego Rivera, who also takes on the figure of La Catrina, also to represent this motherly figure in his life, because this is Diego Rivera and he's holding hands with La Catrina. So in this sense, for him, La Catrina represents Mexico. So we see already that Mexico is represented as death, or the figure of La Catrina, the death. Popular culture is also the heavy metal. And the rock and heavy metal since the 70s has also been elaborating, like Iron Maiden. I have to mention this because you will see it back. This very strong iconography, these representations of skulls and the dead as a living force, of course, in the underworld of the living. So, and of course, just briefly, death has become a totem, or is a totem in societies. By totem, I mean an element that agglutinates and gives identity to a particular group. Claudio Lomnitz, a Mexican-Chilean anthropologist, he has written on this, and he takes on Lévi-Strauss and Durkheim on these notions of totem and how totems are these icons that really agglutinate and build are the basis of community or national identities, as the case of Mexico. And Lomnitz goes further and saying, death is the national totem in Mexico. That was in 2008. And at once we see that Santa Muerte, this devotion, as by the time Lomnitz was saying death is the totem, indeed we see that all these altars and shrines start to pop up everywhere in Mexico. Let's see. So where does it come from? So the representation of the Santa Muerte is very much, in terms of the iconography of the robe and the skeleton and so forth, related to the San Pascualito figure. Already in the 17th century, in Chiapas, south of Mexico, and Guatemala, there was this folk saint, San Pascualito, who was called the Santa Muerte, and he was believed to be a death saint that had very strong power and was very popular among Mayan indigenous populations around that time until today. So San Pascualito is still venerated in Guatemala. Later on, San Pascual was represented also with this robe. This is from the early 1920s, from the book of Navarrete, as the skeleton, representing the San Pascual Rey, so a skeleton representing a saint. And this is an important element because in the Soque culture, the indigenous groups, they were venerating the bones of the ancestors, of the families. They were deposited in caves, and the family would go every now and then to visit their bones and have rituals at the caves in southern Mexico. And the Catholics, what they did was to recode this in the form of a folk saint, San Pascualito. So the indigenous people will still venerate a death figure with bones, but under the umbrella of Catholicism. This was in the 19th century. And in my view, this is a really prototype of Santa Muerte. So this is really the representation that defines much of Santa Muerte today. So the first ethnographic register we can find on Santa Muerte is already by Oscar Lewis. Oscar Lewis, many of you know him, of course. He was this American anthropologist who went to Mexico City, and he wrote this very important book, The Sanchez Family, about this poor family in Tepito, and the way how these poor families were living in urban context and so forth. And he mentions for the first time the image of Santa Muerte. Santa Muerte as a folk saint that protects or enhances the powers of love. So it's believed to be a saint that helps or aids lovers. And then later on in the 90s, so 50 years later, at once we see this article by Thompson, Charles Thompson, who writes on the Mexico-US border, and then he gives, he comments and documents the emergence of the appearance of statuettes, prayers, and stamps, so material culture related already to Santa Muerte at Mexico-US border. I mean, as this folk saint that protects people at crossing the border. And of course, by crossing the border, I mean the official crossings, but also the undocumented crossings of also illegal commodity goods and so forth, smuggling at the border. And then later on, from the 2000s on, we see all across Mexico the emergence of altars, by altars like these shrines I showed you were modeled, on these wagons, but also chapels being built, churches appear, and a very wide array of expressions of material culture in marketplaces and public space in Mexico, particularly in the urban context. So this is basically an urban phenomenon that can be seen in the cities. But this at once, then we see that if the Santa Muerte, if we believe Oscar Lewis, that something happened then, since the 40s until the 2000s, in which Santa Muerte came out of the dark. So from being a clandestine, marginal devotion, it became something that could be shown and displayed in public. And this is very important. So we have this expansion of devotion appearing, popping out in very different cultural geographies, as I call them. So let's have a look at it. Perhaps the most known of these places or these locations is Tepito. Tepito is a popular neighborhood, where also Oscar Lewis was saying, wrote his book about, which is defined by this predominance of criminal actors, right? So there's a lot of smuggling, thieves, you can get robbed and so forth, and it's believed to be part of the identity of this community, of this district in Mexico City. So Tepito is about criminality. Everybody knows you can get robbed, but it's also part of the identity of these people. So there is a very local sense of identity, but also pride in illegality and criminality. And in this context of marginality, appeared in the early 2000s the first so-called altar to Santa Muerte. This is a vivienda. A vivienda is a popular housing in Mexico City. Often, almost all the time for poor people in poor conditions, where this lady, Doña Queta, she's here, but I have a picture of her, she decided to open the first shrine to Santa Muerte. So she, in her house, she opened a hole through which the image of Santa Muerte could be seen by passers or visitors who come to venerate the image. Nowadays it looks like this. This is the vecindad. This is the building where she lives. These apartments, of course, I mean, for many other people. And then on the street side, she has been building over the years. We're speaking about an informal process. Of course, this is not something the state is organizing nor the church. It's informal. She's doing it. She has been organizing and expanding this small chapel, this altar where Santa Muerte is venerated. There are all these images, stamps, oraciones, prayers that are prayed to Santa Muerte. And if perhaps you can read Spanish, you will realize that this is very much the Catholic prayer that somehow is adapted to the Santa Muerte. So they make use of the Holy Father, you know, and the Maria prayers, but in this case for Santa Muerte. Doña Queta, since she's the first one, she has become very well known, and she's become kind of a media personality. So there are interviews, there are documentaries made on her persona, and she always says, "Well, I got, you know, to the devotion to Santa Muerte because of an aunt of her. She saw when she was younger as a child who had an altar, a figure of Santa Muerte in her house. It was a private, you know, a ritual devotion. But once one of her sons got in jail, she made this promise to Santa Muerte, you know, if you can bring back my son alive, then I'll build this altar for Santa Muerte." And so she did. So, and since then, she has been performing rosaries in which she mixes different kind of tradition, Catholic rituality with voodoo. She has been presenting and making use of this fetish. This is what is called within the Santeria oh God, I forgot the word. The regla. Which is the fetish that each initiate receives from his master, you know, to be able to perform the rituals. And then she makes use of this rituality in order to ask for protection to Santa Muerte. And she has become very successful, so she organizes these rosaries every month, where hundreds of people go every month. And every 2nd of November, which is All Saints' Day, the Muertos in Mexico, there are thousands of people coming down to her altar to venerate the image. And of course, among the devotees, we see mostly young people. That's not surprising in Mexico, a country where half population is 25 or less. But they also are from the neighborhood of Tepito, but from other states in Mexico who come to the altar in Santa Muerte to devote the image. Here you can see the altar, so you see a glass that protects the image, and then at the back you see the Santa Muerte, this is her image. Every image has a name, it's unique, and they take personally care of the image. So every day they change the water, they offer apples, they offer cookies, different kind of items offered to the dead. Of course, candles, and then she decorates the altar with all these Catrina images, of course, as you can see here on this part. And then people come to pray the rosaries. This is another image. So as you can also see, she changes over time, every month, more or less, the clothing of the image of the statuette in her altar. This is the 2nd of November. This was last year. I was there for the celebrations, and it was very interesting to see how this private devotion, because people do not show it in public, only when they come for the rosaries, they take their own shrines from their home out to the streets, you know, to bring them to the altar of Doña Queta, so they can be blessed by the image of Santa Muerte. Some of these people, of course, belong to less legal or official activities, so there is a very strong overlap of these different domains visible in Santa Muerte. And then, interestingly, very shortly, before I move on, just across the street, on the other side of Doña Queta's altar, a reproduction of the Basilica of Guadalupe was built. And this is a very interesting example of the symbolic fight about the definition of public space. As Doña Queta becomes very well known and very visible and very public with her devotion to Santa Muerte, which is believed by the Catholic Church to be of Satanists and criminals and drug-traffickers, the Catholic Church, or at least a devotee of the Catholic Church, with own money, builds across the street this reproduction of the Basilica of Guadalupe to say, no, here we are Catholic and Guadalupe. Very interesting. But then we see that Doña Queta, of course, is not the only one. Also in Colina Morelos, in the center of Mexico City, also a very poor, criminal, unsafe, marginal neighborhood of downtown Mexico, appeared the first church of Santa Muerte. This is a so-called church. This is the entrance of the church. Here you have the Santa Muerte image. You cannot see that clearly, but this is San Judas Tadeo next to her, where priest holds masses for the people. And these are basically, as you can see already in his attire, a practice that very much echoes the Catholic rituality. So it's a Catholic mass, but devoted to Santa Muerte. And already you can see, this is hybridism. You can see this mix of different kinds of traditions here. You see the Santa Muerte here, image, with this apple, that also comes from the Santeria, from the Cuban voodoo. The apple is supposed to be an element that takes on bad energy, that can make you sick or make you die. So the apple is purifying in that regard. You see the American flag at the back. Santa Muerte is a protector of migrants as well. So for the way to go back and forth to Mexico and the US. You see the Catholic Holy Bread and the King of Jesus, a king, of course. So there's this mix of different traditions. The Santeria, these puppets that also belong to the Santeria, this Cuban voodoo is also present. So you can see the image again. And here in this church, as I was saying, it's an actual church where people not only come to the masses, but also to the altars to ask for protection. This is another image. Yeah, I don't have time to get into detail into this, but this is a representation of Santa Muerte in flesh, which was very, there was a huge debate on this, because this church decided to represent Santa Muerte not only as a skeleton that scares people out, so they thought, okay, we can represent that in flesh, you know, as a woman, and it was a mannequin, and that was very controversial. But these priests not only performed this role as giving the masses or the rosaries, but also as healers. And in this sense, the Santa Muerte tradition fits very well into these shamanic traditions or cultures in Mexico, where these figures also perform this role, healing people or trying to, as I call it, to calmar la gente, to calm people. To calm people is to ask for protection so that somebody who is involved in drug trafficking doesn't do it anymore. So when you say, I stopped dealing drugs, estoy calmado, I'm calm. So they calm people as well. And these are the powers that are supposed to have. And of course, next to Santa Muerte, you see also Jesus Valverde, the Mexican Robin Hood again, but next to him you see the AK-47, los cuernos de chivo. So these Kalashnikov rifles that are very much used by the drug cartels in Mexico. And here you have then again this mix between this informal image of Santa Muerte with the world of criminality in the altars. This is another element of the church where you see these voodoo or these Santeria elements. I cannot explain this right now, just for you to let you know. And then we see all the natural culture of incense, oils, salts, waters you can drink, use, apply in order to heal or to be protected by Santa Muerte. Okay, this is another altar in the same neighborhood. This is Doña Blanca. Doña Blanca had this Esperanza statuette. That's the name of the image. And she has also very well known with this altar, which is the only one I have found in Mexico that has also living elements. If you can see, she has plants, she has birds, canaries. So she combines the death with the world of the living. And she said, well, I mean, I like to have these canaries and these plants as a way to bring life to Santa Muerte, to the world of the dead. Okay, this is again Doña Blanca. And interesting, you can see that all of these altars combine or double as small shops where they sell the candles, the sprays, or this incense. So in a way, to have an altar becomes your own undertaking and the way to win your bread, of course, breadwinning. Now, this is another one, Tultitlán of Mexico. This was known as the largest statue of image of Santa Muerte. It's more than 20 meters high. And this is also in a very complex part of Mexico City, where this altar was built and these churches and masses were given every Sunday. And you can see that they were very much visited. I have to speed up a little bit. And here, the Panther, La Pantera, Jonathan de Gaia, was the main priest of this church in Tultitlán. Later on, he was killed on very strange circumstances, so he's not anymore, but the church has continued in Tultitlán. In Puebla, in Mexico, something similar happens, also with images of dead people. He was also the first, this is Andrés Bello, who was the first priest in this church in Puebla, where he opened this church. He was the first one. And here also people come for protection and come to get the blessings from the new priest, who was Catholic priest, and then he became Santa Muerte priest in Puebla. This is a picture of a very interesting moment after, at the end of the masses, there's a moment of the so-called the adoration of the images of Santa Muerte, in which people come out and show the images, you know, on the tattoos, or in the wallets they have stamps, or the rosaries, in order to be blessed by the priest. And in Chiapas, of course, you have also the Santa Muerte. And in Chiapas, very interestingly, you have these consultories where people go with these Santa Muerte healers to have access to health. You know, so whenever they get sick, they go to these altars, to these clínicas where Santa Muerte healers are supposed to clean them and get them back in health. And here you can see that people are waiting there. I mean, they don't look anything like a particular criminal or something. I mean, they're just average people who go and have access to the Santa Muerte health. The last example I want to show you, and then I stop, is in Las Pintas in Guadalajara. So this is in the center west of Mexico, where I'm also doing field work. And here, this is one of the, well, actually it's not one of, this is the, according to a German NGO, this is the most polluted region in the world due to the waters that are thrown by the electronics industry in the zona, in this metropolitan area of Guadalajara. Here you have IBM and Motorola and so forth, and they throw the waste waters untreated into the canals. And these canals are highly dreadful. Even babies are born with cancer, with tumors in this area of Guadalajara. And what the government did to decentralize the amount of cases of babies and children with cancer was to close down the hospital. So there will be dispersing in the city. And here, not surprisingly, people don't have money, of course. I mean, the houses are half done, half unfinished, and the only house that is finished and painted is the Santuario a la Santa Muerte de Guadalajara. This santuario was built by a lady. She doesn't want to be recognized as such, who opened this santuario to house the image of her brother. Her brother was devotee of Santa Muerte. This one, she's called La Catrina. And when this brother, under circumstances I still don't know very clearly how, he passed away, she decided to open this sanctuary to put, you know, to deposit the image of Santa Muerte, her brother, which can also be venerated here. This La Catrina, they also change the fabric, the attire every month, and they organize these rosaries every Sunday and Wednesday, where people come and ask for protection and so forth. So what we have, I'm closing up. What we have then is different cultural geographies in which the image of Santa Muerte can relate or not to the world of criminality, and really accomplish different kind of functions. Functions that have to do with health, with protection of criminal, but also people who do not have anything to do with criminality, but also they also create or nurture some sense of community, where people come to these churches and these altars, and they know each other, and they get in touch, and they share, and they offer support to one another. So I think we have enough info to talk about. I stop here.
Thank you very much for a very richly illustrated talk with beautiful images and fascinating. As people are gathering their thoughts, there's just a couple of questions I'll ask before my voice goes again. First, I wondered if you could put your analysis of the Santa Muerte in relationship to other religious trends in Mexico. Mm-hmm. So you've talked a lot about the Catholic, the tense relationship with the Catholic Church, and the context of the space and legitimacy in terms of religious action. How does it also relate to other forms of religious proselytization taking place in Mexico? For example, the new forms of Protestant reformist Christianity and the influence of returning communities from the United States who have been influenced in particular by those processes. So I wonder if you could just put it in relationship to the bigger religious landscape. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the other one thing I just wanted to ask about was the striking importance of what seems to be gender, mm-hmm. and the important role played by women in the establishment of particular altars and churches. And is that somehow related to what you're describing as a sort of movement of the Santa Muerte out of the intimate and into the public, or other more complicated ways in which we could think about that?
Okay, I don't know, I mean...
Yeah, you answer and then people will.
Yeah, yes, I mean, the Catholic Church since the very beginning has been very critical about this, and this is not, this is important. We shouldn't overlook this issue. Since, well, I mean, in the last 30 years, there has been a very quick change in the religious landscape of Latin America. I mean, from being a dominant Catholic region, we have had a very strong process of de-Catholicization or the emergence of rise of different denominations in Latin America that have to do with evangelism and Christianism, the Holy Spirit renewal movement and so forth, that have had a strong influence, particularly in marginal regions of Mexico and Latin America, where of course there is a very strong presence of these new denominations. What I'm saying is that since this landscape has quickly changed and very rapidly, there has also left room for this kind of devotions also to appear. And the Catholic Church is concerned about this. Since the very beginning, they have officially made known their opinion or perspective on Santa Muerte, saying that Santa Muerte is a protector of criminals. You know, that Santa Muerte is related to the world of criminality and drug trafficking, and that people shouldn't, you know, be venerating death, which is an anti-value, they say. And Santa Muerte is therefore an anti-religion. Right? This is the official Catholic position regarding this, because it's not about life but about death. It's not about community but about destruction. It's not about positive, you know, values in life, but about trafficking, weapons, killing somebody else, and surviving, you know, in this context of high violence. So the Catholic Church has had a very strong opinion on this, which was aired and circulated very strongly during the early 2000s. And they realized that the more they spoke about it, the more visible it became. So at a certain point they stopped speaking about it. So there are no, since 2008, when one of the founders of these churches in Corona Morelos in Mexico City was put in jail. We cannot develop everything, but one of the founders of the Corona Morelos church, he was accused of linkages with kidnapping networks in a country like Mexico, where only 0.2% of all cases end up with somebody in jail. It's very remarkable that in this case in particular, it was very efficient to find this priest guilty and put him in jail. He says himself that it was a story made up by the Catholic Church, that somehow through the connection with the state, they organized this case to be arranged and put him in jail as a way to diminish or try to lower the influence of Santa Muerte among devotees or popular sectors in Mexico. What I'm saying is the opposition of the Catholic Church, which was very open and very visible in the beginning of this process, nowadays is vanished. They know that the more they speak about it, the more people will be curious about this phenomenon. So they have decided to stop speaking about it. But it doesn't mean that they have an opinion or a relation to it, which of course they have. But on the other hand, and that's the point I try to make with this cultural geography of Santa Muerte is not only one thing, it's many things. It's an informal system of religious belief in which everybody can stand up and make an own altar, an open own church, and create these centers of pilgrimage and devotion, through which people also make money. So there is also an economic part of it. What I'm saying here is that the large process of Santa Muerte in religious terms also points at the institutionalization of Mexico's life. So religion also takes less place within the realm of institutions. So we see that precisely because this is informal, this is very flexible, and it's open to criminals or not, to drug traffickers or not, to people who are ill, to transsexuals, to gays. So they take on all these identities that do not fit within the institutions, they call them on, and they have strength through this. So they have found a very fertile soil in Mexico, and I guess that also can explain why it has grown so quickly. So that about the Catholic Church. So the Dorton communities, yes, I mean, the Santa Muerte has become the protector of migrants as well. So that's why the flag is there, and one of the churches I'm working on is also called the Iglesia Mexico Norteamericana, so the Mexico North American Church. So this binational, this transnational aspect is very present there as a folk saint who protects people on the move, smugglers, and so forth. Then to move on the gender part of the question, yes, it's double. I perceive that the ministers of the devotion, so the ones who hold the masses that you could see, are men. So in that way, they do reproduce this gender divide, or this gender organization of the tasks and practices within the devotion. So men are the ones who administrate the devotion and of the masses and so forth. But the women are the protectors, as they call it, las patronas of the altars. So they are the ones who are taking care of them and the ones who open them. So there is a very clear distinction. And yes, women are very part of this, but they are not yet ministers. They don't perform the masses as males do. So even if you see a role for women in this devotion, still is not equal compared to that of men.
Felipe.
Yeah, my question follow up a little bit from Magnus's. And one thing, well, the first was a comment, but perhaps it does make sense, given that many dimensions of La Santa Muerte, but it does make sense to map out these different aspects of Santa Muerte, what they're good for, why they approach, what sort of offering they get. And to some extent there is already, what has been done, for example, in India with reference to a goddess.
No.
A goddess is one, but it's got very different aspects, and people approach very different aspects. And also this interesting thing that perhaps I didn't get it clear. Santa Muerte is about connecting different worlds, but also connects to these other images of icons that emerge of these sort of criminal saints, which are very powerful, and yet they can take on, they can take control of your life.
Yeah.
So to think a little bit more about that. But my question was about, again, about the Catholic Church, and I was wondering whether in Mexico, as you know, in Italy, for example, in the last, at least 10 to 15 years, the Catholic Church has taken a clear position of excommunicating those who are accused of organized crime, mafia, camorra, ndrangheta, etc. Partly because these guys have been, at the local level, very, very prominent in the life of the church, very strong devotees of particular saints. And I was wondering whether there is a similar move has taken place here, whereby criminals seek, because they cannot get the blessing, the support of mainstream saints, and move in that direction.
Okay. I think I would take one step back from your question, and I will ask, what's the relation between the Catholic Church and organized crime? So,
that's exactly where I started in my mind. I was thinking here about Bloch and Enzo del Carrera writing about brigands and bandits in Italy, the way in which, at a certain period, they have an antagonistic relation to the church, but as with the unity of Italy, then the relationship changes. And being people who live a very dangerous life, they do have these very strong moments or episodes of devotions. And in fact, in many churches you find this for received grace, where people...
Precisely, And that happened, as well in Mexico. El Chapo Guzman, perhaps you know this figure, who was one of these top barons in the 1990s. In Mexico, he was very well known for his narco-limosnas, from this money he was giving out to the church. Drug traffickers, as the Chapo did, they had a very strong role within their own local communities, providing services, in terms of security, but also infrastructure, also to the church. So churches were built with money from drug trafficking. This is a very uneasy issue in the Catholic Church. It's very clear, it has been documented. It happens still nowadays, but the church doesn't want to speak about it. So in that sense, this relation between this criminal or the underworld of the church has been clearly also pointed out in Mexico through the limosnas, so the money and the relation or the protection of criminals by bishops and archbishops, also, and cardinals in Mexico. One cardinal was killed in Guadalajara in 1994, 92. Under very clear circumstances, he was also in disguise, apparently, or people were confused as whether he was a Chapo, this drug baron. So he got killed in the airport, right? He was shot dead. The point I'm trying to make here is that this relation between the Catholic Church and drug trafficking has been clearly proved or documented, and people know about this. And this is the reason why I guess the Catholic Church, in Mexico at least, is not pointing out that this relation anymore as they did, because they have lost legitimacy. Many of these devotees I have spoken to, they say, well, why should I go to the Catholic Church, and go to the Mass performed by a priest, when with the same hands he's giving me the Holy Bread, he has been touching children, or he has been receiving money from drug trafficking. So the issue of drug trafficking, or the relation between drug trafficking and the church, as the Catholic Church, or any other church, is not relevant anymore. That's the point I want to make. So of course they know, and they see these images of Malverde and this relation to the criminal world, but for people this becomes one element more in this landscape in which people ask for protection. So it's one of the other devotees that have access to the church. And my clue, my suspicion is right now that precisely because of this openness, that's part of the strength in this process. Nobody's out, everybody's in, and this creates this dynamic through which, whatever you are, whatever you do, you are always welcome, and you're part of this community.
Alex.
Thank you for this amazing tour through this incredible set of images. It's just so many questions that it raises. It's fantastic. There's obviously a whole complex set of relations. There are so many different levels that are mediated here. and Santa Muerte as an intermediary in a whole bunch of different dimensions, effectively. I was just wondering, just to ground, at some level the analysis focuses on the icon itself, and there's so many different dimensions. But I was wondering about the feelings of people who actually go to pray or to conduct rituals at the altars. What do they pray about there? What are the feelings? What sort of feelings? Is there some distinctive sort of set of feelings that it raises to actually attend these shrines? And who do they pray for beyond the icon itself? In other words, could you say a little bit more about the icon as an intermediary? And to what extent, you mentioned the statistics of violent death, etc. To what extent is Santa Muerte an intermediary between the living and the growing numbers of people who've died violent deaths? Do you have any information from people who you met whilst attending the shrines on that front? So more on that.
I'm sorry, the last part was about the statistical information regarding the amount of shrines or the
do you have any interview materials from people who are attending the shrines and to what extent they see them, to what extent those people are using these shrines as a sort of way to mediate between themselves and maybe family members or etc. who've died violently?
Yes, you touch upon a very important part of the story here, the mediation. And there, of course, I'm not finished. I'm still working on this. I will go back to Mexico this year to finish my fieldwork. I see two things. From the point of view of the believers, the devotees, Santa Muerte brings justice. This is the main claim. They perceive Santa Muerte as the main source of justice they can address or they can approach. This is not accidental. In Mexico, the impunity levels are skyrocketing. As I was saying, only 0.2% of all accusations, of crimes or violent death and so forth end up with a responsible in jail. So the level of impunity is high-rocking. Right now, the president has been receiving houses of multi-millions of dollars worth, and nobody knows clearly why, nobody knows clearly to what extent, what kind of favor, exchange of what. So what I'm talking is that corruption is not hidden, it's everywhere, and it conforms a very important element of social dynamics in Mexico. People, in this context, people know they have nothing to expect from institutions. I'm speaking about the state as such. I'm speaking about the Catholic Church as such. It's a Catholic Church full of pedophile priests. It's also corrupt. It's related to the underworld as well. So why should us believe in this system of community in which we operate independently and autonomously from institutions, right? In this context, the only source of justice is death. And death is the only one who makes justice. This is strong, this is extremely powerful. So only death, not human or institution, can make justice. And this is what they pray for la justicia. Because only death is just, is fair, they say. So this is issue about fairness and justice. So only death can bring that in Mexico. On the other hand, the figure, because it's fair and just, will lead you to the good death, la buena muerte. So these youngsters, many of them are involved in kidnapping, trafficking. There are also many of them who work in marketplaces and carry out legitimate activities. Not all of them criminals. But the ones who, in my view, or from the signs I can read, when I go to these rosaries, and at once I see this guy wearing all these golden necklaces and bracelets and this very expensive cowboy attire. In my view, that's clearly a narcotraficante. Those are the signs I can read. And then he comes with a whole band of mariachi and norteño music to bring a concert to the Santa Muerte in Macho Boñaqueta in Tepito. He's clearly buying, he's exchanging some favor. And what he's expecting to receive is a buena muerte. A good death is a quick, a painless death. So this is the kind of material, you know, I'm hearing from the people. I'm speaking about the people who are related to the underworld, the world of criminality, and they are, and you can talk to them, they're present there, right? But at the same time, and that's why I speak about this geographies in plural, it's not only one thing, it's many others. So if you have all these prostitutes and transsexuals who go to Santa Muerte to ask for protection because on the street they can be beaten up, they can be killed, and they are often, and so forth. So also transsexuals are a very strong part of this devotion as well. People who don't have no employment, you know, people who are just switching from one activity to the other, they ask for prosperity to Santa Muerte. And the fairness then is also materialized in a good job or an income, you see. The issues about health, that's why I have to point that out as well. So Santa Muerte is also a mechanism to have access to health. So whenever you have cancer, whenever you have kind of diabetes or AIDS, Santa Muerte will either perform a miracle and heal you, or bring you to a good death.
Just going to keep the questions as concise and as possible. Demetrius.
Okay. Thank you very much for the paper. I have to admit, you addressed it now during Alex's, your answer to Alex's question, but I mean, we're talking about Mexico, we talk about death. The last few centuries, most deaths have been caused by the Spanish imperial state, the Mexican state, United States during the war. I mean, where is the state into that discussion of death? Because we talk about death and about all these local ways that Santa Muerte is addressed, used, you know. But the bottom line is that the Christian love for death, this tomato-latric Christian tradition, has served very well the purpose of the state. You're a martyr, it's okay, you can't die. You know, it's fine, you will go to paradise. Today we see in the case of Islamic jihadism a lot, but you know, it is a Christian tradition as well.
You mean to die for something?
Pardon? Loving death, kind of glorifying death on one aspect, or being fine to die. And, you know, you have also in Christianity, you have all this love for skulls of saints, for hands of saints, and all these miraculously, or whatever it's considered. So I was wondering again, what is the state in all this discussion? Because we also talk about the death of the students, and basically was an anti-authorities, an anti-state protest that they were planning when they all of them vanished massively and assassinated, as it looks like by the mayor, the police chief, and lots of state officials who are not exactly bad apples. It is a corrupted, lethal state, like most states are corrupted, lethal, and machines. So where is the state in all this discussion of Santa Muerte? That's my question. Or if it is somewhere, if it fits somewhere with the narrative.
I perceive the state as one of the other institutions. So the state plays a role as much as the Catholic Church plays a role, or the family institution plays a role. And in that case, what they have all in common is in crisis, and they're all collapsing. So as much as the state has collapsed already in Mexico, or the Catholic Church is collapsing and vanishing away. I mean, the Catholic Church recognized like 2 years ago that 68% of Mexicans were Catholic. We're speaking about a loss of 30%, you know, in the last 20 years, so it's ramping. Families are also collapsing. The institutional context, or the notion of the family as a father, the mother, and 3 children is completely vanished in Mexico. You know, of course there are families with 2 breadwinners, you know, a mother and the children. But the fact of these single mothers, of people who are left, you know, behind by the migrant parents and so forth, is a very strong reality. And in that case, I think together with the state, what we see is a collapse of institutional life. So I think that's what comes in the picture. You know, how the state, as the other institutions, have collapsed, are collapsing in Mexico, and Santa Muerte, in many ways, represents everything that went wrong with institutional life in Mexico. And I would even say, I cannot elaborate on it right now because I have to speak about the drug wars and the violence in Mexico and the exchange of favors and messages through violence and death in Mexico. But Santa Muerte represents that everything that went wrong with Mexico under the underworld reform.
Just a very quick comment, and I will stop that. Sorry for intervening. I think that we are, I mean, I'm not sure if the explanation of collapse satisfies me, and that's probably my problem rather than the problem of your paper. I think that on the contrary, the state is changing, and what we're seeing is change in, you know, the war, the drug war that the United States declared against Mexican migrants, basically, which was translated within Mexico as a mafia state, which eventually is well connected with the United States. You know, we are dealing with all these lethal state policies. I'm not sure if we can call it collapse. I think that it is just a changing phase. It is actually a very strong state. It is an extension of the state's para-state, part of the violence, because they are so closely connected with the official state that is not exactly a collapse. At least, as far as I understand from your narrative, from what you presented to us, it seems to be something well connected with state up to hierarchs. But that's some food for thought. I may be wrong with that.
Okay. Next question, Jackie.
Thank you. I sort of, like Alex was saying, I was really keen to learn more about the people who devoted to Santa Muerte and look after them. There just seems to be so many mothering activities, and dressing and feeding and all these kinds of things. But now, Nisha is saying, some of this makes me think about Angelina Godoy's work on popular injustice in Latin America and the rise of extrajudicial violence and lynching and just, you know, as you were saying earlier about the kind of finality of death as the ultimate justice. And I think there is something in there with this idea of the state. On the one hand, it is the metaphor for justice. And then, you know, it's whether it's absence or presence, but yeah, I don't know. I think in the lynching metaphor, people are more kind of parroting state activities or kind of military ones. And here, yeah, I'll leave it at that. It might just be more of a comment.
Do you want to reply to that? Just think about it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there is one aspect I didn't have time to develop, which is the and have to raise to the devotees the relation with the images, with the statuettes. They become individualized and unique, and they become so by a personal interaction with these images every day. People offer them water, tequila, cigarettes, incense, the apples, fruit, cakes. They perceive them as a person. They are personalized and humanized through this relation they build up with them. This is something that the priests or the healers or the patronas, you know, like Doña Queta, ask them to do so. So the first thing, whenever you want to ask for the protection of Santa Muerte, is you have to have your own image. You take her home, you know, you put it in your room or in your living area, and you take care of her every day. You give her what she likes, what she asks for, you know. So people give her, once again, alcoholic drinks or food, the candles, and through this, they develop this personal relation with the images. In many cases, these images represent a deceased person. Like this case in Guadalajara is very much the case in which this lady, when her brother passed away, he left behind this image he had in his face. And she was confronted with, okay, what should I do with this image? You know, so she realized that the best way to pay tribute to her own dead brother was to build a sanctuary for this image. And in that way, the image becomes a fetish. The image becomes this representation of a deceased person. And many deceased persons are people who die because of violent death, you know, people die because of a disease. But in many cases, what I'm trying to say here is that these images represent somebody who is not with you anymore. So the image materializes a deceased person, for sure.
Peter.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. I wanted to ask more about these bandit folk figures and the kinds of transformations that are going on here. And I thought about it in terms of, in Andalusia, for example, you've got as well, like people saying this, you've got these bandit figures, but they're sort of popular culture figures. No. They're anti-religious, they burn churches in popular uprisings, burning churches in Andalusia in the last century, in the 19th century. Anti-secular, very much anti-state. But here these folk figures seem to become religious icons, and there's some strange transformation going on. But the question I wanted to ask was, what wasn't clear to me was, you began by saying that these folk figures were the origins. You had El Santa Muerte, that then became La Santa Muerte, became feminine. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying they still exist, El Santa Muerte, and therefore exist in parallel with us? So what is the sort of, I guess the question behind it is the gendered aspects of La Santa Muerte, why or how she becomes feminine out of these folk bandit figures.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's...
I mean, yes, you're right. Santa Muerte, this Argentinian folk saint, which precedes Santa Muerte, because it has been already from the 1930s, it's masculine, San La Muerte, and represents as a masculine figure. I assume there is some kind of relation with Santa Muerte, but I haven't been able to prove it. I haven't been able to really find ethnographic material to realize how this can connect, to Santa Muerte. There is obviously a very strong parallel in terms of the representation, the use of the Franciscan robe and so forth, but it doesn't come per se from Santa Muerte, because there is this Catholic representations of all these saints really preceding Santa Muerte. So that's why I have to speak about this Catholic iconography as one of the sources, one of the matrices of the repertoires feeding, nurturing Santa Muerte. Because I guess that would be the point in common with Santa Muerte, that both feed from this Catholic, the Spanish Catholic iconography, and then becomes a folk saint. The point of the gender itself, Santa Muerte, is a very interesting one. At once, it seems to be an inversion of the Virgin Mary. So at once, it seems to perform as the other side of the Virgin Mary, but at other moments, it seems to be the feminization of Jesus. This clothing of images is very important. Once again, in central Mexico, there is a very strong tradition of clothing the Jesus as a child, of taking care of your image and buying all these clothes and capes and so far and so forth, and taking care of your images. From that point of view, it seems also to influence the clothing or the attires of Santa Muerte. So in that way, it performs as a Jesus, because it's this power that also is masculinized and is above all the kind of saints and all kind of gods and so forth. So it's complex. And then to put it even in a more complex context, I think in many cases it's transsexual. It changes sex, it becomes one or the other, depending on the context it's being used. For instance, I'm also working in Queens, in New York, with Mexican communities there. And there's a woman from Central Mexico, from South Mexico, from Guerrero, who was a male before. And through the image, he won, as a transsexual woman, legitimacy in the community, because now he or she's healing the people and he's welcoming all these migrants who come to deposit the images in their house and so forth. So she's a very interesting case in which this inter-transsexuality is also present in Santa Muerte. Because Santa Muerte is a mother, but also a father, is the dead, it's also the protecting power. So I don't have something I'm still thinking about, and you are very right as well, to point that out, the gender part of it, not only about the administration, organization of the devotion, but also what does the image in itself represent,
Thank you. It was really fascinating to talk. There are so many angles, so I'll just probably try to sort of develop one, which I think is quite important. So in a way, how to move away this from kind of classical style of popular religiosity. Yeah. It's quite interesting, but it's not really what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm really wanting to push a bit the question of the sovereignty here, because I think you can speak much more of the intersection of political theology and political economies. Why I'm saying that? Because the reference you're making here is, well, first of all is, you know, the sort of medieval time and the way in which, you know, the Catholic Church represented that as a very dark time, which is actually completely, you know, sort of very interesting historians are actually looking now at medieval questions and importance of touch, smell, and the seat of the soul, and actually the porosity of the soul, the mythology of that time. So that's this kind of representation of the Catholic Church. So, and that the presence of the sovereignty, the sovereign in that and how it transpires here, because this kind of becomes also within a particular history of Mexico, the sort of Cristo Rey, which kind of holds the globe, but it's really the crisis of the residual of the sovereignty here. And why, in a way, Foucault does not help. I mean, Foucault never really helped us because he didn't write enough about it so soon, I think. But there is not a passage between the sovereignty and the biopolitical. Here is the residual of the sovereignty that finds a place in the power state, because this is very much a question, it's not just as a catalyst today, but it's a way in which the state has transformed and live off, and is within that contradiction of the living of the sovereignty, or the sovereign in a way. And it's really interesting because I'm just sort of thinking about the parallel between what, you know, the last work of Agamben, thinking about economia, which is so much based within the tri-model of the Christian, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit, which is often related to the Virgin, and is related to the economy of grace, and what you were talking about, why they talk about Santa Muerte and Esperanza. I mean, this is the crisis of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is coming back with a certain notion of the sovereignty. So if you were to think about this, you know, as a transformation of the state, then there are all the other roots about regionalism, which are also very important within a debate in Santa Muerte in Mexico. But what does it say, this, in terms of a particular conjuncture of political economy and political theology, where also Mexico has suffered a crisis of the relation between labor and rents. I mean, first the economy of oil, and now the economy of drugs, which is exactly the disconnection between labor and rents. And this is exactly emerging at that moment. So you could actually write in this to tell us something about transformation of state sovereignty and the way in which this kind of residuals, very powerful proto-states, are still with us, and they're using a very different justice. I mean, this is exactly a very sovereign idea of medieval time. So I think it's fascinating. It's just if you move away from, I mean, you can still write about popular religiosity, but I think this is much more interesting if you actually talk through religion to other fields. So I don't know if this type of kind of analysis would go with, or is provoking you to think?
No. I mean, I have had this discussion with a colleague from Utrecht on sovereignty, because sovereignty is the main topic of the cultural anthropology in Utrecht right now. So they try to look at sovereignty everywhere. So I said, no, please don't do it this time around. So you came back, I mean, with that question, which is interesting in itself. Look, I don't know if this is the own influence of my previous work and the way I look at it, because I got to look at this through the angle of the marketplaces and the material culture, and how economic space, like a marketplace, which is utterly informal and flexible and changing, is also open to this sort of expressions. And there, what I see here is a very complex cultural phenomenon that in many cases has become a cultural mechanism for people to deal with death and violence and uncertainty and crisis. I think this image resumes and also epitomizes these conflicts I just mentioned in Mexico, and the way they look through protection, you know, or they deal with loss and disease and poverty through an image. which comes back, I mean, to this popular religiosity, of course, you are pointing out. Within that context, I realized that everybody can open up their own altar church. There is no centralized authority. There is no rituality on which you say the green means this, the yellow means that, the incense of coral is good for this. Everything is open and flexible. And there are multiple interpretations in which people use the same instruments or attributes with different meanings. This means for me that this is an utterly informal and open system of religious belief that acquires different meanings and practices and connotations according to the social context it is practiced. In that sense, for me still, I mean, I want to think through what you're saying. How can I relate this to the state? The state in Mexico has become its own counter-state. You know, the state is both, right? But also the state has lost its most important function in society, which is security. The state has lost completely the monopoly of violence. Everybody can perform violence and go away with it. And that's why the state for me, in this point of analysis, and I really want to think through this, I mean, what you're telling me, I don't know to what extent the state really is an element that explains the organization or the emergence of the devotion beyond this fact, you know, that the violence, you know, the state has lost its monopoly over violence, and therefore its most important function, which is provide security. I mean, we know this, Charles Tilly and so forth, you know, I mean, the state is the one who provides, or the legitimacy of the state is about the provision of security.
Although it's also the power, the legitimacy is also, you know, the power of the authorities is also, sorry, but it's also the be able to invest with an office. Yeah. It's exactly, I mean, although you are saying there are different proliferation, but I see very much an investment of the office. I mean, Doña Queta becomes the office, you know, the divine officer in that moment.
Yes,
so
yes, yes.
The horizontal proliferation, I understand, so it's not like a vertical papal authority, but at the same time there is an investment on an office here, which is normally what the state does, you know, does well. But when it doesn't, or becomes like a parastate, then it kind of gets dispersed. But nonetheless, there is that kind of need for that sovereign, which is again because the biopolitical ways which the state should work as it want, right? The kind of distribution of the territory, the sort of the health regimes, we know all of that. So I will just provoke you.
No. I mean, yes, I'm completely open to speak. So the question I'm going to reverse the question. Yeah. Are we then dealing with a sort of proto-formation of a proto-religion, of a proto-state, or some kind of activities that belong to an earlier process of state formation?
I'm thinking, yeah, because there are some elements about that. I mean, we are thinking about sort of what is are we in a post-state, are we in a proto-state, are we in an extension of the state, or we are sort of, we need probably to also anthropologically look at the proto-state, you know, before that. You know, how we dealt with issues about personhood, about ontology, and what do we learn from that now? Because exactly that is about the negotiation of, you know, particular, at least Christian triad. That is not working. I mean, you're saying it's not working instead.
We'll move on to the next.
Okay, carry on, sorry.
I gather Felipe is taking everyone out for the tequila slammers, and then they're going to build the Santa Muerte in Brighton.
We already did.
They've got a few more questions. John?
Yes. I mean, I think I'm asking some of the things Valentina, but
so we can move on.
Much more pedestrian. No comment at all. I mean, I was struck by one of the points at the beginning. You kind of say all begins focused around death. Death is, by definition, a bad thing. And my understanding, of course, of Christianity, that's not strictly straightforwardly true. Actually, death is the moment of justice. It's the moment where you hopefully, if everything's gone right, you achieve grace, or the potential on the line towards grace. Which is a grace of the spirit, but also potentially, particularly for saints, a grace of the body. So it seems to me to be two big things which are going on here, at least theologically in terms of religion. One is a breakdown in the economy of grace. I was going to use that phrase, you got there first. but it's about a breakdown of the economy of grace. But there's also something bizarre going on in relation to morbidity. And I mean, that morbidity has always been at the centre of Catholic iconography, etc. But it has a particular place. The place isn't, goes back to the extent to which these are Marian representations. Mary, like Jesus, ascended body and soul. And saints, as we know, don't decay in the same way that other bodies. So what's going on in relation to ideas about morbidity specifically and decay in relation to grace?
Yeah. No, I mean, yes. I mean, I'm just taking on this. I mean, yeah. No, but I mean, unless you have something. I mean, you want me to react on, but of course I take your. No.
Well, I just think that's a way of focusing in on a little bit more. I think a number of the questions have been thinking about what's the content.
Yes.
We talked a lot about form, but actually, what's the content? Essentially, that is part of the content. Is this breakdown in the consequence, but also this kind of strange inversion of ideas about movies.
Because I mean, why not? And I'm just thinking loud. I mean, with you, of course. I mean, I guess that's also the idea.
Thought is not allowed.
There is. I'm not allowed to think.
Not very often.
I'm not allowed to think with you.
But we won't denounce it.
It's about justice, and this is. I'm trying to find an overarching, way of dealing with the questions about the state and anti-state and this economy of grace and so forth. It's about justice, as I was saying, but there is also something about visibility, that only death can make violence or injustice or abandonment visible. There has been a number of cases, like the streets of Ayotzinapa, where only the body, the remains, make death visible. Also of families and parents. There is a case I was working on of a police officer in Mexico City who was killed during one of these actions against drug trafficking. And the family was never officially informed about the decease of this police officer. So the mother was utterly, of course, shocked and so forth. And she asked, as the last favor of the last will, to be to hold the velorio. How you call this in English? The velorio? The veil? How would it? The night veil? When somebody dies, you spend one night with the body. The vigil to take place in front of the Minister of Justice of Mexico City. And they took, I mean, that's what I wanted to have access to my images, because that was part of the argument I wanted to make today. They took the coffin, they opened up, and the veil took place, the vigil took place on the street in front of the Minister of Justice. This is about death. This is about how death makes injustice also visible, and we notice and we take note on these issues by looking at death. So I'm looking at how this relates, of course, to Santa Muerte, because Santa Muerte also makes this crisis and this collapse absolutely visible.
James has been waiting with characteristic patience, so over to you.
Thank you. I thought we'd move on. I'm really enjoying the discussion. I'm not sure that my question is going to add to it, but it might do, because you mentioned that the best thing to do at one point for somebody who had got an artifact from a brother who had died.
So excuse me then?
One of the people who had died, assisted, inherited. The best thing to do was to set up an altar. So in a way, why was it the best thing to do? What was going on what would have happened if they hadn't set up an altar? Now, the altar, to some extent, these altars, they need a bit of money. And some of them obviously need a lot of money, so people are spending money, and so there's a reason, don't think has quite come through for what would happen if you didn't.
Yeah. Look, the sanctuary was built by the husband of this woman, so by the brother-in-law of the deceased man. The deceased man is the first guy who opened up an altar in Guadalajara next to the train rails, where, by the way, all these migrants from Central America get to Tijuana, to the border. So since they are tired, they haven't eaten for weeks or at least days and so forth, they get off in Guadalajara because Guadalajara is higher. So they can get off the train goes slower, of course, they can get off and on quicker. And then next to the point where many of these migrants jump off, which is in this Colonia Las Pintas, which is one of these most marginal places in Guadalajara, where they overstay and people give them water and so forth, and they're taken care of. This guy decided to open an altar to Santa Muerte. This is another dimension, I mean, of course, to make it more complex, I mean, how migrants ask for protection to Santa Muerte. The point is, there was a fight among this guy and other people who were also participating in the administration of this altar. They break up, they get this fight, this guy gets out of that place, kicked out, he died in the process. I guess he was killed, but I haven't gotten to that point with her, you know, that she can openly tell me that they killed him. So I assume that, with all the reservations. And then I guess as a way, you know, to continue with this devotion of the brother, and also as a way to contrast what these people at the railways are still doing nowadays because they have this altar, she decided, with the help of her husband, to start very slowly with this sanctuary. And that was part of also of the interviews, you know, I mean, kind of with her, you know, how they paid it, because of course, this is money, you have to invest, you have to put it. It's the only building which is finished in this neighborhood, so it's very obvious that there is money being invested and put into this sanctuary. And then she started to talk about, once again, about the brother, and this is a way to pay tribute to the memory of her brother. And this is a way in which I have to come back to the issue how this figure of La Catrina represents her brother. So these images are the fetish, you know, of the deceased ones.
You spoke at one point of the possibility of possession.
Yeah.
From someone possessed.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility? Is it that the brother is? When is the brother dead but not dead? Is there a kind of purgatory? Is there a possibility of a possession or protection from the dead to the living?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's what precisely, I mean, the Santa Muerte does. I mean, the protection. There is one part, and I mean, here I'm showing the process of my own fieldwork. The husband of this lady, he's the one who performs 90 rituals in this sanctuary. So he's the only one who, I guess, performs some kind of santeria or witchcraft through which he updates or freshens up the power of the image, as strange as it sounds. I mean, I'm not done with my fieldwork once again. So this guy goes by night and performs rituals with the image. I don't know which ones, because nobody's allowed to get it. And this is the way he recharges the image, you know, which once again represents the dead brother. So in her case, it's very clear that this image represents her brother, for sure.
Okay, just a few more questions. Faisal.
I think a lot of discussion happened on this stage, so I haven't...
Ask the question.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, still. I was wondering, because with Christianity and in the state, the narrative is that it breaks down the traditional kinship community barriers and brings a society as such. The older pagan connections are more tied to those kinship networks, where violence is organized around. And if there is a breakdown of the state as such, and there is an emergence of more pagan ways of worshipping, are there instances where we also see other forms of kinship and gift relations, which have been documented resurfacing in a different way. That would be.
See, you've been plugging in my question.
Kinship, yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to respond?
I didn't really fully understand. What the question is about. Can you please repeat for me?
The representation through these pagan images. If we are thinking of them as symbolic of something, it is not just about violence. Is it just about violence? And our understanding of violence in the pre-state societies is a lot related to tribal kinship connections also. And if a non-state type of violence is being represented through these pagan images, are there other forms of sociality, of kinship, gift relations, of reciprocity, which are supposed to fade away with Semitic religion and then the state resurfacing too? Is that a reversal, or
what is the reversal of what, sorry?
It just can't be the. It's a question to anthropological theory as such. That if pagan images, for example, that right, are representative of larger social organizations, then can we see other social forms emerging too with these types of worshipping happening?
No, this is unique. This is the only image that, Jesus Malverde, the Mexican Robin Hood I told you in the beginning, he's popular, but is much, by far more a regional image that has somehow circulated and transcended its own regional context, but is no way comparable to Santa Muerte. The San Nazario, of the Michoacan family, the other one with the saint and the guns, and he wanted to become an icon, a popular icon, kind of religious protector of drug traffickers. He didn't succeed. Santa Muerte has succeeded because in many ways it relates to an iconographic continuum as well. People relate to it and they think this brings them back to the culture of the Mexicans. That's also an important part of it, how people think, okay, this is something that our ancestors did to venerate the dead, so it's okay to do it, vis-a-vis the position of the church, of the institutions, to say this is anti-religion, this is anti-value, this is anti-society, this is about death and destruction and violence. And basically the most abstract, representation of life in this sense for these people is death, and this is why it has circulated as no other one in Mexico.
Question at the back. Still 2 minutes.
I want to take you back to what you said was the turning point, the disappeared students. Which is, of course, a strange case of disappearance because actually we know more about them and where they might be and what's going on than we do with most disappearances. And it disappeared either living or dead. There's the absence of life and the absence of death. We have this figure, this symbol, which is somehow that bridge between the two. But we have a whole group, they have a present group by their absence, who don't fit into either category. We also have as you say, increasing impunity. The impunity itself is missing judicial review. It's full of justice. It's a system of crazy justice. And this community we talk about, isn't so much a community. They are, in other disappearances, other students, they would have been disappeared by other members of the community. And I'm wondering how one of the relatives of the disappeared approach what they say. One, how they reconcile their disappeared, who were also part of the same community. And knowing that the people who disappeared them, who were complicit in their disappeared, are also part of that same community. There are tensions within the community, huge tensions. And this body, which are neither living or dead, and I want to try and understand that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question. And you're right. I mean, these disappeared people are the ones who have appeared actually, because by disappearing. The detentions there. I mean, no. I mean, it's not. If I give that impression, that's not what I wanted to say. It's not that the tyrants are believers of Santa Muerte. No, I mean, for me, I wanted to say with presenting the image of talking about the Ayotzinapa case is how death, you know, what the representations and experiences of death in Mexico are, that very much can help us to explain the rise and the emergence of Santa Muerte.
But there are a lot of disappearances in Mexico.
Hundreds of thousands.
So
yeah.
That must be part of maybe the students are one particular issue, but there must be people a part of this community who have experienced disappearances. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, you're touching there, on a very important issue which I haven't really thought until now. I mean, on whether the believers, the devotees, have themselves people disappeared, for instance, right? They have people killed, of course. I mean, due to violence, drug-traffickers in the neighborhoods and so forth and so forth. That's clear. And once again, the image becomes a fetish of the deceased ones. But in the case of the missing, I haven't really touched upon that, and I couldn't give an answer. But this is something that I should really look into.
Yes. Thank you. First of all, I'm an economist, so apologies if my comment is out of place. I just wanted to comment on your when you were talking about how Santa Muerte brings together the illegal beliefs or illegal activities with the real life. And I wanted to ask you, what is the role that San Judas Tadeo is playing in this? San Judas Tadeo, to put a little bit of context, is officially recognized by the Catholic Church in Mexico, but it's also linked to illegal activities or people involved in illegal activities. And then you have this, San Judas Tadeo has many followers now in Mexico. So what role is he playing in your narrative of bringing together these two types of activities in Mexico?
Yeah. No, I mean, you're completely right. I mean, San Judas Tadeo, I mean, is this one, right? I mean, the one we showed you before. This guy. Oh, can you see? No.
Yeah.
So it's this. I mean, behind this San Judas Tadeo, this Judas, who's also very popular. Well, on the next one is very clear. Oh, here is very clear. So next to the Virgin in the middle is the San Judas Tadeo with this coin on the chest. San Judas Tadeo is, of course, an official Catholic saint. So there is nothing folk or unofficial informal about it. Like the Virgen Negra, and you're right in that case, it has in common the fact that he's also protector of people who do criminal activities, and most importantly, police officers. So San Judas Tadeo, and there is this church in Mexico City on Reforma Avenue, where this is the main altar, the main church for the devotion to San Judas Tadeo, and people who are, Catholic or they live official institutional lives, they also turn to San Judas Tadeo for protection. So in that sense, yes, the San Judas Tadeo, as Santa Muerte does, is also believed to be protector of criminals, people who are engaged in criminal activities, including police officers. But it's part of the official repertoire of the saints of the Catholic Church, and Santa Muerte is not. Santa Muerte is completely a phenomenon that appears from below, is completely informal. It has not a clear genealogy at once it appeared, in the public space in Mexico, so it's completely different in that sense. As I was already said before, the Santa Muerte is a folk saint which is informal, unofficial, and it takes place and is organized out of the institutional life of Mexico. So that's a main point of difference.
Hi, I'm a political scientist, but I wanted to touch upon some of these questions about the state and about the broader security crisis that you're trying to tap into to understand these representations of death, but also this emergence of this devotion. And it struck me that what you were trying to describe, although you called it collapse, was not really a collapse of the state, but rather a kind of hybridization of the state. an interpenetration of the state and criminality, such that we can't actually distinguish any longer between the two. And I was wondering whether the work of Sayek Valencia, Capitalismo Gore, and her discussion of the Endriago subject, this kind of hybrid subject, monster and angel, and so on, and how, in fact, precisely the emergence of this subject, which is exemplified by policemen, by military officers, by judges, people who are supposed to be in roles of protection, actually interpenetrating the criminal world, how that actually might allow you to speak about the emergence of this devotion as trying precisely to map onto this kind of dislocation of logics of protection by the state, the kind of dislocation, for example, of attributions for human rights violations, which are very complicated. When Mexicans are now seeking asylum, they're told it's also complicated. Who is to blame? Is it private actors who are causing you to be persecuted, or is it the state? But it's precisely this interpenetrative structure. And the Endriago is a very interesting phenomenon, because precisely it's about the materiality of that culture, where labor markets and work is no longer available, but it's only available through these offers of protection or criminality. All right, and it strikes me as very evocative of the kinds of things you're trying to describe, which are fascinating.
I don't work, and I like it. I mean, and that's the theoretical angle I'm working on for the book. You know, how in this neoliberal capitalist context, the economy of war and destruction and death, you know, is a very important aspect in the advancement of the state, but also the industrial life and so forth. Yes, I mean, so I'm taking that on completely. And yet, you once spoke about the collapse. And I stick to my guns. The fact, you know, that the state is unable to provide security, the fact that the state is absolutely surpassed by the amount of bodies appearing all over the country, the fact that the state is incapable to carry out forensic research on these deaths, the fact that the state is not able to present a credible, substantial account on what's going on in Mexico, speaks about a state that is not complaining, is not carrying out activities it should do, you know, it was doing before, I cannot do it anymore. So there is an important change in the dynamic of state since 2012. And I think this is very much the key to understand Mexico right now. What the state was in Mexico prior to 2012 is very different from what's going on right now.
And you're wanting to say that's collapse rather than a kind of a necropolitical...
I'm also working once again on the core capitalism. I'm thinking about, we just had this morning. Yes, you're right. But right now about the state, I can only say the state, Mexican state, is not functioning as it did before.
That's the thing, the point about the way you're holding on to the notion of the collapse of the state is also an ethical and a political point, that to make alternative arguments with Mexican people in the situations that they're in. There are problems with doing it. There's one more question I want to ask, because it's very important that PhD students contribute and give me ways.
Now this is from a quite different angle. It's a historical question really, and you drew out the roots of the iconography through pre-colonial and European roots, and I was interested in the relation between Santa Muerte and syncretistic death gods or death spirits in with West African and Christian Catholic religions in the Caribbean and in Brazil, because there's a lot of parallels, especially efficacious intervention and the possession you mentioned with the Santa Malandros and the giving of alcoholic spirits as a gift or a bribe for efficacious response, and you mentioned a few times voodoo and bacteria. I was just wondering how those links worked, what the connection was, and what was moving back and forth.
You're right. I didn't elaborate on that, and just before you go, I'm thinking about that and whether or not the Mexican state right now is a state that also administrates death as a way to withhold a position.
I have a colleague,
Yeah.
Aguiar, in the Center for the Study of North America,
Yeah.
studying precisely that.
Yeah.
But let's keep in touch.
Yes.
I'm very
Yeah.
interested in that. Sorry.
Yeah, the voodoo. Yes, there is an issue of brokerage about the original African traditions. Many of these practices from Nigeria and Benin and so forth were brought to Cuba, and they became ingrained into Cuban popular religiosity from Santeria. Santeria is perhaps the most important form of religious belief in Cuba nowadays. Mexico was extinct from this influence from African cultures, basically because there were not that many populations from African origin. Of course, there were in Veracruz and in Guerrero, and once Mexico became an independent nation, these black slaves, they ran away, and they were running as far as they could, and they went into small villages in the highlands and the jungle and so forth. Something changed in the last 20 years, through which Santeria has become more visible and more accepted in Mexico. And I believe it has to do also with migration of Cubans into Mexico, and how into this economic way of survival, they also take Santeria as a way of participation, and Santeria influences very much Santa Muerte. I wasn't aware of that. I thought that Santa Muerte was more about this hybrid Catholic tradition that in which related to this world of criminality period. But no, as deeper as I go, I realized that all these priestesses make use of coconuts, and they leave them in the corners. They make use of all these Santa Barbara, all these different saints that have the double also as Orisha, as voodoo powers or gods. And then, to my surprise, I realized that actually Santa Muerte, for a strong part, is a travestism of Santeria. Do you see what I mean? So much of the rituality of Santeria is nowadays taking place under, the devotion of Santa Muerte, because the way of all these healing practices with different kind of eggs and chickens, and the use of certain kind of herbs and so forth is very much defined by what we know as Santeria right now. But Santeria in Mexico is linked to black people, and which is perceived by many Mexicans as something aboriginal, very primitive, stupid. So to present this through the glass or the representation of Santa Muerte is a way to bring legitimacy, and that's effective.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was excellent.
Thank you for all the questions. I mean, that gives me a lot of food and
We don't normally grill our guests. So you're really